For exactly 20 years, 7 months, and 4 days, billionaire CEO Victoria Kensington had not felt the ground beneath her feet. She had exhausted the brilliant minds at Johns Hopkins, spent tens of millions at the Mayo Clinic, and resigned herself to a life confined within a custom-built titanium wheelchair. The world's greatest neurologists had unanimously declared her spinal cord irreparably severed after a catastrophic car crash. Her fate was permanently sealed, or so the medical establishment claimed. But they didn't account for a muddy-booted, exhausted single father delivering a cardboard box on a rainy Tuesday, a man who possessed no medical degree, yet spotted the sinister, multi-million-dollar lie hidden in plain sight. High above the fog line of San Francisco, the Kensington estate sat like a sterile glass fortress overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. Inside, the temperature was strictly regulated to 68 degrees. The air was filtered through hospital-grade HEPA systems, and the only sound that echoed through the marble hallways was the high-pitched, rhythmic hum of a motorized wheelchair. Victoria Kensington, 42 years old and the sole heir and CEO of Kensington Biomedical, maneuvered her chair toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman of striking, severe features, her dark hair pulled back into an uncompromising knot. Beneath the tailored Saint Laurent blazer, a rigid, state-of-the-art carbon fiber brace encased her torso, locking her spine into what her doctors called optimal therapeutic alignment. 20 years ago, a horrific collision on the Pacific Coast Highway had crushed her sports car and, allegedly, her L4 and L5 vertebrae. She had woken up in a trauma ward with no sensation below her ribcage. Since that day, her world had shrunk from ski slopes in Zermatt to boardrooms and sterile living quarters. She trusted no one, save for the man who had pulled her from the wreckage and managed her care ever since. Dr. Harrison Gallagher, Kensington Biomedical's chief medical officer. Miles away, in a cramped, damp apartment in the Mission District, Thomas Wyatt was trying to coax his 8-year-old daughter, Maya, to take her nebulizer treatment. "Just 10 more deep breaths, sweetheart," Thomas said, his voice gentle but laced with exhaustion. He watched the mist curl around Maya's small face. Her asthma was severe, complicated by a rare autoimmune condition that required expensive, out-of-pocket treatments that his insurance company, Pacific Blue Health, aggressively refused to cover. Thomas rubbed his eyes. He was 38, a former lead structural engineer at Boeing. 3 years ago, corporate downsizing had cost him his career, and his wife's sudden passing shortly after had cost him his anchor. Now, to keep his flexible hours and pay for Maya's specialists, he worked for SecureLogix Freight, a premium delivery service that transported highly sensitive medical supplies, confidential documents, and specialized pharmaceuticals for the ultra-wealthy. "Daddy, you're going to be late," Maya rasped, pulling the mask down. "I'm never late, kiddo," Thomas smiled, kissing her forehead before handing her over to Mrs. Higgins, their elderly neighbor who watched Maya during his shifts. He grabbed his heavy canvas jacket, the worn leather of his boots squeaking against the linoleum. He had a tight schedule, and his first drop-off was a highly sensitive delivery of proprietary IV nutrient blends for a VIP client in Pacific Heights. The San Francisco rain was relentless as Thomas pulled his delivery van up to the imposing iron gates of the Kensington estate. After a thorough security screening that involved retina scans and x-raying the packages, he was escorted by 2 silent security guards into the cavernous foyer. "Wait here," one guard grunted, leaving Thomas dripping rainwater onto the pristine white marble. A few moments later, the quiet whir of a motor approached. Victoria Kensington rounded the corner, her face buried in a tablet. She didn't look up. "Just leave the insulated boxes on the console. And tell your dispatcher that the temperature gauge on yesterday's shipment was off by 0.2 of a degree. It's unacceptable." Thomas blinked, wiping a bead of rain from his brow. "Ma'am, the internal monitors logged a stable 36 degrees Fahrenheit for the entire route. I checked the telemetry myself before I brought it to your door." Victoria finally looked up, her eyes, a piercing, icy blue, narrowed. She was not used to being contradicted, certainly not by delivery drivers tracking mud onto her imported Italian stone. "The log is wrong," she stated flatly, "and you are dripping on my floor. Leave the boxes and go. Thomas felt a flash of irritation. He had slept 3 hours, fought with an insurance adjuster all morning, and was in no mood for aristocratic condescension. He walked over to the console, but as he shifted the heavy, insulated box, the slick condensation on the exterior caused it to slip. He lunged to catch it, twisting awkwardly. The box slammed onto the marble. The lid popped off and 3 glass vials of amber liquid shattered, splattering across the floor and onto the wheels of Victoria's custom chair. Silence hung in the massive room, heavy and suffocating. "Do you have any idea," Victoria whispered, her voice vibrating with cold fury, "how much those synthetic neural peptides cost?" "I apologize," Thomas said, immediately dropping to one knee to carefully gather the broken glass. My hands were wet. "I'll call Secure Logics and have them dispatch a replacement order immediately from my own pay." "Your pay?" Victoria let out a short, hollow laugh. "Mr." She glanced at the badge on his jacket. "Mr. Wyatt, you could work for 100 lifetimes and not cover the cost of what you just destroyed. Get out." Thomas stood slowly, holding the shards in his calloused hands. He looked down at the woman in the chair. He didn't see a terrifying billionaire. He saw someone trapped, angry, and surrounded by an architecture of isolation. "I said I'd replace it, and I will," Thomas said firmly, his voice devoid of the usual sycophantic fear she encountered. "But for what it's worth, Miss Kensington, whatever they're charging you for those peptides, it's a scam. The active ingredient is just a stabilized B12 complex. I read the manifest. You're paying millions for fancy vitamins." Victoria froze, genuinely stunned by his audacity. Before she could call security to throw him out, Thomas deposited the glass into a nearby waste bin, nodded politely, and walked out into the rain. Against all logic, Victoria didn't have Thomas fired. She had tried to, but when Dr. Harrison Gallagher reviewed the incident, he smoothly advised her to let it go. The stress of a lawsuit or replacing the courier team isn't good for your blood pressure. "Victoria," Gallagher had purred, his perfectly capped teeth flashing in a reassuring smile. "I'll have the lab whip up another batch. Focus on the upcoming board vote." The board vote. In 2 weeks, Kensington Biomedical was slated to vote on absorbing a massive pharmaceutical conglomerate. Victoria wanted to veto the merger, knowing the conglomerate intended to bury Kensington's affordable medical patents to protect their high-priced monopolies. But Gallagher, who held significant proxy power, was subtly building a case that Victoria's deteriorating physical health was affecting her mental acuity. Over the next month, Thomas Wyatt remained her regular driver. A strange, abrasive dynamic developed between them. Thomas refused to treat her like glass. If she was rude, he called her out. If she complained about the weather, he reminded her she lived in a climate-controlled box. Slowly, the icy walls around Victoria began to thaw. She found herself looking forward to the muddy boots and the complete lack of pretense. She learned about his former life as an engineer and, more importantly, she learned about Maya. One Tuesday afternoon, Thomas arrived to find Victoria in the middle of a physical therapy session in her private gym. "Doctor." Gallagher was present, supervising as a technician adjusted the intricate carbon fiber and steel brace that encased Victoria's lower torso. "Tighten the lumbar ratchets," Gallagher instructed the technician. "We need absolute compression on the lower thoracic vertebrae to prevent muscle spasms." Thomas stood in the doorway, holding a fresh box of medical supplies. He watched the technician crank the dials on the back of the brace. Victoria grimaced, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair until her knuckles turned white. Thomas's eyes narrowed. His mind, trained for decades in structural load-bearing, stress distribution, and mechanical failure points, automatically analyzed the brace. He looked at the angle of the struts, the tension of the straps, and the direct pressure points applied to her spine. "That's completely backward," Thomas muttered. Gallagher turned, his impeccably groomed eyebrows raised in annoyance. "Excuse me? Are you still here, delivery boy?" Thomas stepped fully into the room, setting the box down. He walked straight toward Victoria, his eyes locked on the brace. "I said, the load distribution on that rig is backward," Thomas said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who used to design the skeletal frameworks of commercial jets. He pointed to the lower lumbar section. You have the primary tension struts pulling inward, creating a fulcrum right at the L4-L5 junction. If the goal is to stabilize the spine, you disperse the weight to the hips and shoulders. This design doesn't support her spine. It acts as a mechanical vice. It's actively compressing the nerve roots. Gallagher let out a patronizing chuckle, stepping between Thomas and Victoria. Fascinating. I wasn't aware Secure Logics required their couriers to hold advanced degrees in neuroorthopedics. Miss Kensington's brace is a proprietary, FDA-approved device designed by the top biomedical engineers in the country. Then your engineers are idiots, or they're trying to break a bridge, Thomas shot back. He looked past the doctor, meeting Victoria's eyes. Miss Kensington, I spent 15 years calculating structural tolerances. If you apply constant, focused PSI to a central axis without dispersion, you cut off the flow of energy. In a building, it causes a collapse. In a human body, it cuts off the nerves. That brace isn't helping you. It's strangling your spinal cord. Enough! Gallagher barked, his face flushing red. Security! Remove this man immediately! Two heavy-set guards rushed into the room, grabbing Thomas by the arms. Look at the blueprints for the brace, Thomas yelled as he was dragged backward toward the door. Look at the localized transdermal pads on the inside of the lumbar strap. What are those releasing into your skin, Victoria? Look at it. Get him out of here and ban him from the premises, Victoria shouted, her chest heaving. She was furious. How dare he? How dare a delivery driver walk into her home and question the medical care that had kept her alive for 2 decades? Once Thomas was thrown out, the room fell silent, save for Victoria's ragged breathing. Gallagher placed a soothing, manicured hand on her shoulder. I am so sorry about that, Victoria, Gallagher said softly. The man is clearly unhinged. Perhaps the stress of his daughter's illness has caused a psychotic break. Don't give his ramblings a second thought. I won't, Victoria lied. That night, lying in her custom orthopedic bed, Victoria couldn't sleep. The mansion was dead silent. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass windows. A mechanical vice, Thomas's words echoed in her mind. With trembling hands, she reached under the covers and traced the edges of the heavy brace she was required to wear 24 hours a day. Her fingers brushed against the thick lumbar strap. There, hidden on the interior padding, she felt them. Small, rigid squares embedded in the fabric. Transdermal patches. Gallagher had always told her they were anti-inflammatory pads to prevent bed sores. But as she pressed her fingernail into one, a sharp chemical numbness instantly radiated into her fingertip. A cold dread pooled in Victoria's stomach. Using her upper body's strength, she dragged herself to the edge of the bed and pulled herself into her wheelchair. She wheeled over to her private server terminal and, bypassing the standard medical dashboard Gallagher monitored, she hacked into the raw manufacturing schematics of the neurosomatic lumbar brace. It took her 2 hours of bypassing encrypted firewalls, a skill she hadn't used since her early 20s, to find the original patent documents filed under a shell company owned by Gallagher. She stared at the glowing blueprints. Thomas Wyatt, the exhausted father in muddy boots, was absolutely right. The schematics explicitly detailed a neural suppression fulcrum. Furthermore, the chemical composition of the transdermal patches wasn't an anti-inflammatory. It was a potent, localized synthetic neurotoxin, a derivative of a paralytic agent designed to keep motor neurons perpetually dormant. The accident 20 years ago hadn't severed her spinal cord. It had bruised it. Dr. Harrison Gallagher, the man she trusted with her life, the man poised to steal her company, hadn't been treating her paralysis. He had been creating it. For 3 days, Victoria did not leave her bedroom. She canceled all video conferences and locked the master suite doors, claiming a severe migraine. In truth, she was fighting a war inside her own body. The moment she had unbuckled the brace and thrown it across the room, the withdrawal began. The synthetic neurotoxin had essentially chemically castrated her lower nervous system for 20 years. As the drug began to clear her system, the dormant nerves began to fire, wildly and violently. It was an agony unlike anything she had ever known. It felt as though millions of glass shards were being forced through the veins in her legs. She lay on the floor, shivering, sweating, and biting into a leather belt to keep from screaming and alerting the household staff. She couldn't call another doctor. She didn't know who was on Gallagher's payroll. She couldn't call the police. She had no physical proof that wouldn't be dismissed as the paranoia of a sick woman. And Gallagher would immediately enact the medical proxy to have her committed. She was entirely alone. By the evening of the third day, a massive atmospheric river slammed into Northern California. The storm brought hurricane-force winds that ripped through San Francisco, uprooting ancient eucalyptus trees and snapping power lines. At 9 p.m., the grid supplying Pacific Heights blew out. Inside the Kensington mansion, the lights flickered and died. Normally, the massive diesel backup generators would kick in within 10 seconds. Victoria lay on the hardwood floor, gasping for air, waiting for the familiar hum of the generators. 10 seconds passed, then 30, then a minute. Total darkness, total silence. Gallagher, he knew. He monitored her biometric outputs from the brace remotely. When her vitals flatlined on his server because she took the brace off, he must have realized she discovered the truth. He had sabotaged the generators. The electronic locks on the mansion's doors would default to a deadbolt lockdown in a power failure. She was trapped in a freezing, pitch-black house, unable to walk, suffering from severe neurological withdrawal. Across the city, Thomas Wyatt was sitting in the dark in his apartment, watching the storm rage. Maya was fast asleep, her breathing steady. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about the look in Victoria's eyes when he was dragged out. He couldn't shake the guilt of overstepping, but his engineer's intuition screamed that he was right. When the power grid map on his phone showed Pacific Heights going dark, Thomas felt a sudden, sickening drop in his stomach. He knew the electronic security systems in those mega mansions. He knew Victoria relied on automated medical equipment that required constant power. "Mrs. Higgins," Thomas said, gently shaking his neighbor awake in the armchair where she was dozing, "I need you to stay with Maya. I have to go out." "In this weather, Tommy? Are you mad?" "I have to," Thomas said, grabbing his heavy maglite and a crowbar from his toolbox. It took Thomas an hour to navigate the debris-filled streets in his heavy delivery van. When he finally reached the Kensington estate, the iron gates were locked tight, the security cameras dead. He didn't hesitate. He climbed the slick, rain-slick stone wall, tearing his hands on the wrought iron spikes at the top, and dropped into the manicured courtyard. He ran to the front door. Locked. He moved to the side of the house, smashing a reinforced glass patio door with his crowbar. The alarm system was dead. He stepped inside, sweeping the beam of his flashlight across the cavernous, dark rooms. "Victoria!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the marble. He ran up the sweeping staircase, taking the steps two at a time. He reached the master suite. The double doors were locked. Thomas wedged the crowbar into the seam and threw his entire weight against it. The wood splintered, and the doors burst open. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness and found her. Victoria was curled into a fetal position on the floor near her bed, trembling violently, drenched in sweat. She looked pale, fragile, and utterly broken, a stark contrast to the imperious CEO he had met weeks ago. Thomas dropped the crowbar and slid to his knees beside her. "Victoria, hey, it's me. It's Thomas." She opened her eyes, struggling to focus on his face. You came back." "Of course I came back," he said softly, taking off his dry canvas jacket and draping it over her freezing shoulders. "The power is out. You're freezing. Where is your emergency medication?" "No meds," she gasped, her hands gripping his shirt. "No more. You were right, Thomas. The brace. It was poisoning me. Gallagher. He's been keeping me paralyzed." Thomas felt a cold shockwave hit his chest. He looked at the heavy carbon fiber brace discarded in the corner of the room. The sheer evil of it was staggering. "We need to get you to a hospital," Thomas said, sliding his arms under her shoulders and knees. "A real hospital, not one owned by your company." "It hurts," she sobbed, a sound of pure vulnerability escaping her lips. "Thomas, my legs. It feels like they are on fire." "That's the nerves waking up. It means they're alive," Thomas said, his voice steady, offering a strength she desperately needed. "I'm going to lift you up. Ready? 1, 2, 3. As Thomas lifted her off the cold floor, Victoria let out a sharp cry of pain. Her body tensed involuntarily. And then it happened. As Thomas held her weight, he felt a sudden, distinct pressure against his left forearm, which was supporting her legs. It wasn't gravity, it was a muscle contraction. He froze, shining the flashlight down. Victoria's right foot, encased in a thick woolen sock, moved. It was a small, jerky motion, a mere twitch of the ankle, but in the 20 years since the accident, it was the most monumental movement she had ever made. Victoria stared at her foot, her breath catching in her throat. The pain momentarily vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, impossible shock. She looked up at Thomas, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the sweat. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Thomas looked into her eyes, a fierce, determined smile breaking across his face. "I saw it. You're coming back to life, Victoria. Now, let's get you out of this tomb." The flicker of movement in Victoria's foot was a miracle. But they had no time to celebrate. A heavy, rhythmic thud echoed from the ground floor, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Thomas instantly switched off his flashlight. He pressed his hand over Victoria's mouth, his eyes adjusting to the pitch black of the master suite. "Check the backup generators first." A harsh voice carried up the sweeping staircase. It wasn't the police. It was Richard, the head of Kensington's private security detail, a man fiercely loyal to Dr. Gallagher. The boss said the biometric telemetry flatlined an hour ago. "Sweep the rooms. If the cold hasn't finished her off, we make it look like a tragic fall in the dark." Victoria's eyes went wide with terror above Thomas's hand. The reality of Gallagher's betrayal slammed into her with a final, brutal clarity. He wasn't just going to let her die. He had sent his men to ensure the job was done before the storm cleared. "Hold on to my neck," Thomas whispered, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. He didn't take her toward the main hallway. Instead, he carried her to the walk-in closet. Victoria, despite her pain, pointed a trembling finger toward a concealed cedar panel at the back. It was a service corridor designed by the original architect for the domestic staff, long forgotten by everyone except the woman who had spent 20 years staring at the blueprints of her own prison. Thomas kicked the panel inward. He maneuvered them into the narrow, dusty passage, just as the heavy oak doors of the master suite were kicked open behind them. Flashlight beams sliced through the dark bedroom, missing them by inches. They descended the service stairs in agonizing silence. Victoria bit down on Thomas's canvas collar to suppress her groans of pain. The withdrawal from the synthetic neurotoxin was tearing through her nervous system like wildfire. They reached the sub-basement garage. Thomas's delivery van was parked out on the street, but getting there meant crossing the floodlit driveway. Instead, he spotted an old, heavy-duty utility truck the landscapers used, keys hanging carelessly from the ignition. He settled Victoria into the passenger seat, hot-wired the garage bay doors to bypass the dead electronics, and slammed his foot on the gas. The heavy truck burst through the wooden bay doors, tires screaming against the wet pavement. Gunfire popped over the roar of the storm, Richard and his men shooting from the balcony, but the thick metal frame of the utility truck absorbed the impact. Thomas smashed through the wrought iron service gates and disappeared into the flooded, chaotic streets of San Francisco. "Where? Where are we going?" Victoria gasped, clutching the dashboard as another wave of neurological fire swept through her legs. "We can't go to a hospital. Gallagher's holding company owns a stake in half the emergency rooms in the Bay Area. He'll flag my name." "We aren't going to a hospital," Thomas said, his grip white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "We're going to a mechanic." 30 minutes later, Thomas carried Victoria into the back room of a dilapidated auto body shop in the Mission District. The shop was owned by Arthur Pendleton, an eccentric, retired trauma surgeon who had lost his medical license a decade ago for running an off-the-books clinic for undocumented immigrants. He was also the man who had desperately tried to help Thomas's late wife when their insurance, Pacific Blue Health, cut off her treatments. Arthur took one look at Victoria. Then, at the discarded carbon fiber brace, Thomas dragged in behind them. "She's toxic," Arthur muttered, shining a penlight into Victoria's dilated pupils. "Severe alkaloid poisoning. What the hell did they put in that torture device?" "A localized synthetic paralytic," Thomas said grimly. "Arthur, I need you to detox her, and I need you to document everything, every chemical in her blood, every muscle response. We are going to build a bomb to drop on Kensington Biomedical." For the next 2 weeks, the back room of the auto shop became a secret sanctuary and a grueling rehabilitation center. The withdrawal was barbaric, but as the poison left her system, the miracle Thomas had witnessed in the mansion became a daily reality. With Arthur managing the severe pain and Thomas utilizing his engineering background to build a makeshift set of parallel walking bars out of welded exhaust pipes, Victoria fought for her life. It was here, stripped of her billions, her title, and her pristine glass fortress, that she discovered her true strength. It was also here that she met Maya. Since Thomas couldn't leave Victoria's side, Mrs. Higgins brought his daughter to the garage after school. Maya, small and pale, would sit quietly with her nebulizer, watching the billionaire CEO struggle, sweat, and cry as she tried to force her legs to support her weight. One afternoon, Victoria collapsed against the metal bars, panting, tears of frustration in her eyes. She felt a small hand tug on her sweat-soaked t-shirt. She looked down to see Maya holding out a battered juice box. "My dad says, when the structure feels weak, you just need to reinforce the foundation," Maya said softly, coughing slightly into her sleeve. "You're doing really good, Miss Victoria." Victoria took the juice box, her heart breaking. She knew about Maya's autoimmune disease. She knew the treatments were denied. And as the CEO of the parent company that owned Pacific Blue Health, she knew exactly the algorithms her executives used to automatically reject expensive claims like Maya's to boost quarterly profits. "Maya," Victoria said, her voice hoarse, "when your dad makes a promise, does he always keep it?" "Always," the little girl smiled. Victoria looked across the garage at Thomas, who was covered in grease, analyzing the chemical breakdown of the neurotoxin on Arthur's ancient computer. He had risked his life, his job, and his freedom for a woman who had treated him like dirt. "Then I'm going to make you a promise too," Victoria whispered to the little girl. "Everything is going to change." The executive boardroom at Kensington Biomedical was a sprawling masterpiece of intimidation, perched on the 50th floor of a glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. A 40-foot slab of polished rare mahogany dominated the space, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, God's-eye view of a sun-drenched San Francisco. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 18 days since Victoria Kensington had vanished into the storm. The board of directors, a ruthless collection of wealthy, severe men and women who controlled billions in pharmaceutical assets, sat in hushed, nervous murmurs. At the head of the table stood Dr. Harrison Gallagher. He wore a custom-tailored, charcoal Brioni suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expression painted in a masterclass of solemn, dignified grief. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Gallagher began, his baritone voice echoing smoothly off the acoustic glass panels. He pressed a hand over his heart, looking down at the empty leather chair at the opposite end of the table. "It is with a profoundly heavy heart that I must finally address the tragic elephant in the room. As you are all aware, our beloved CEO, Victoria, has been missing for over 2 weeks. The Coast Guard and local authorities have exhausted their search perimeters." A low murmur rippled through the room. A board member named William cleared his throat. "Harrison, the press is circling. The stock is taking a hit. We need a definitive statement." "And you shall have one," Gallagher continued smoothly. "Given her severely deteriorating physical condition and the intense psychological strain she has been under recently, which I have documented extensively in my medical files, we must prepare for the absolute worst. It is a devastating personal loss. But Kensington Biomedical is a titan, and it must survive. As her designated medical proxy and the second largest shareholder, the bylaws dictate that I step in as interim CEO." Gallagher picked up a thick, gold-embossed folder. "My first official act is to authorize the immediate merger with Apex Pharmaceuticals. Yes, it means liquidating our affordable care division, but this deal will secure our market dominance and our financial legacy for a century. We vote now." "The only thing you're securing is a cell in federal prison, Harrison." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the cavernous boardroom like the sharp crack of a whip. Every single head snapped toward the heavy mahogany double doors. There stood Victoria Kensington. She was not strapped into her $150,000 titanium wheelchair. She was not encased in the restrictive, suffocating carbon fiber brace that had defined her existence for 2 decades. She was standing. She leaned heavily on a pair of sleek, custom-machined aluminum forearm crutches. Her legs, hidden beneath a sharply tailored navy trousers, were visibly shaking from the sheer exertion of holding her own weight, but her posture was uncompromisingly straight. Her icy blue eyes locked onto Gallagher with the intensity of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Beside her, solid as a mountain and radiating quiet menace, stood Thomas Wyatt. He wore a clean but worn charcoal suit, his broad shoulders squared, holding a heavily scarred leather briefcase. The color instantly drained from Gallagher's face, leaving him looking like a wax figure left out in the sun. He stumbled backward, knocking his crystal water glass onto the polished wood, the water pooling like a spilled secret. "Victoria, you're alive. The authorities thought you were dead." "You hoped I was dead," Victoria corrected, her voice dripping with venomous clarity. She took a slow, deliberate step forward. Clack. The rubber tip of her right crutch hit the hardwood floor. Clack. The left followed. The sound was deafening in the absolutely silent room. Thomas walked in perfect lockstep beside her. He kept his hands hovering just inches from her elbows, ready to catch her if her atrophied muscles gave out, but he fundamentally respected her enough to let her take every agonizing step on her own. She reached the opposite end of the table, gripping the edge of her empty leather chair, and stared down the board of directors. "There will be no merger with Apex Pharmaceuticals," Victoria announced, her voice gaining strength. "And as of this exact fraction of a second, Dr. Harrison Gallagher is terminated from this company, stripped of his medical license, and facing 20 years to life for attempted murder, corporate espionage, and gross medical malpractice." "She's completely insane," Gallagher finally shrieked, his polished, aristocratic veneer shattering into a million pieces. "Security! Someone grab her! She's having a violent, psychotic break from her medications. Look at her! She can't even stand properly!" "I am standing well enough to watch you fall to your knees," Victoria replied coldly. Thomas stepped forward. He hoisted the heavy leather briefcase onto the mahogany table and snapped the brass locks open. He pulled out the modified, heavy carbon fiber brace and slammed it down right in the center of the table. Next to it, he dropped a massive stack of medical and financial documents. "This is the proprietary neurosomatic brace Dr. Gallagher forced Miss Kensington to wear for 20 years, Thomas addressed the board, his voice projecting with the absolute, unquestionable authority of a man who dealt in facts, gravity, and steel. "My name is Thomas Wyatt. I am a former lead structural engineer. I have documented with complete mechanical schematics how this device was explicitly built not to support a damaged spine, but to act as a mechanical vice. It was intentionally engineered to apply localized extreme compression to the L4 and L5 nerve roots." Thomas flipped open the toxicological files Arthur Pendleton had painstakingly prepared in the auto shop. Furthermore, the interior lumbar padding contains a localized, highly concentrated synthetic paralytic. Gallagher patented it 12 years ago under a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. He didn't treat her paralysis. He manufactured it. He kept her strapped in a chair to control her proxy votes, and to eventually sell this company for parts while she withered away in a glass box. The boardroom erupted into total, unmitigated chaos. Wealthy board members scrambled out of their chairs to grab the documents, their eyes widening in horror as they read the undeniable chemical breakdowns, the engineering blueprints, and the bulletproof financial trails connecting Gallagher to the offshore shell company. Realizing he had lost the room, Gallagher lunged for the side exit. But as he violently yanked the door open, he found himself chest to chest with 2 stern-faced FBI agents and a very smug-looking senior detective from the SFPD. Arthur Pendleton had made some incredibly strategic phone calls to old colleagues, ensuring the authorities were waiting in the lobby exactly on cue. Harrison Gallagher, the lead federal agent, said, aggressively spinning the doctor around and slapping heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. "You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you use it." As Gallagher was dragged away, screaming obscenities and threatening lawsuits that would never happen, Victoria looked down the length of the table. The board members were staring at her in stunned, terrified silence, waiting for the axe to fall on them next. "Now," Victoria said, taking a deep, shuddering breath, feeling the glorious, white-hot ache of the muscles in her legs, a pain that meant she was alive. "If everyone would kindly take their seats. We have a massive company to rebuild, and our very first order of business is completely gutting the claim denial algorithm at Pacific Blue Health." It took a full year for the dust to settle. The scandal rocked the global medical establishment to its core, generating countless documentaries and a massive federal overhaul of proprietary medical patents. Kensington Biomedical, under Victoria's fierce, uncompromising, and renewed leadership, canceled the monopoly-driven merger. Instead, she aggressively pivoted the company's massive resources toward affordable, accessible autoimmune treatments and advanced structural orthopedics. She never returned to the sterile glass fortress in Pacific Heights. She sold the property to a tech billionaire and bought a sprawling, warm, single-story ranch house in Marin County. It was filled with natural light, wide open spaces, dogs, and absolutely no stairs. On a bright, breezy Sunday afternoon, Victoria sat on the back patio. She wasn't using the forearm crutches anymore, just a single, elegant wooden cane resting against her chair. She watched with a soft, genuine smile as Thomas, who was now the fiercely protective head of biomechanical engineering for Kensington's new prosthetic division, chased a laughing, wildly energetic Maya across the lush green lawn. Maya hadn't needed to use her nebulizer in over 6 months. Her new, fully covered, top-tier treatments had put her rare condition into total remission. Thomas jogged over to the patio, slightly out of breath, the afternoon sun catching the silver starting to show in his hair. He handed Victoria a glass of iced tea and sat down beside her, his rough, calloused hand naturally and easily finding hers. "You know," Thomas smiled, looking out at his daughter before turning his warm brown eyes to Victoria, "I was looking at the telemetry on your new leg braces this morning. You're showing a 98% muscle recovery. Structurally speaking, Miss Kensington, you're entirely sound." Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid, honest weight of the man who had torn down her prison with his bare hands. "Well," she murmured, squeezing his fingers, "I had a pretty good engineer. Sometimes the most miraculous cures aren't found in billion-dollar laboratories or the hands of world-renowned surgeons. Sometimes the answer arrives in a battered delivery van, carried by someone who simply refuses to look away from the truth." Victoria's wealth couldn't save her from the greed of those she trusted, but Thomas's sharp mind and fierce compassion broke the chains of a 20-year lie. Their story is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength isn't just in our bones or our bank accounts. It's in the people who stand by us when we are at our lowest, ready to help us fight our way back into the light. If this story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate justice moved you, please hit that like button. Share this video to remind others that the truth always finds a way out of the dark. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible, real-life stories of triumph against all odds.